Orthodox people around the country. And so I am delighted that I get to come here on Ancient Faith every week and meet another interesting everyday Orthodox Christian. And I'm so glad that you have joined us. You know, all of us, the Orthodox people, we have interesting stories, right? We have a lot of immigrants who come from faraway places. We have children of immigrants who grow up in fascinating families. And then, of course, we have converts like me, and we come from all different walks of life, and we grew up in different ways. And we find the faith, interestingly, in a lot of different ways. And in fact, tonight's guest is also a convert. And so we'll find out how he found the faith and what he's been doing since he came into it, and I guess beforehand as well. But you're welcome to join the conversation. You're welcome to call in anytime with comments and questions. The number is 1-855 AF Radio. That's 1-855-237-2346. And Matushka Trudy Richter, our producer, is right here engineering the program and taking your calls. So if you call, you can say hi to Matushka, and then you can come through and talk to our guest. But I do want to apologize. My voice is a little gravelly tonight. It would seem that I am dealing with a bit of the COVID, but thank God it's all so mild now that it's been just fine. And, you know, it's funny, at the beginning of this pandemic, we talked a little bit on this show about the fact that we aren't able to get out and get to know new people as much right now, especially when, you know, if you're on lockdown or if you're quarantined or different things. And now I'm quarantined, but I get to meet somebody on this show. So I'm delighted. So don't worry, I'm all alone here in my little studio. And my guest is all the way across the country, so we're all quite safe. But at any rate, without any further ado, I want to tell you about our guest tonight. It's going to be Dr. Michael Cider Rose. And you may actually have heard his name a lot lately because he's actually all over Ancient Faith Radio, and appropriately so. He's been working on a really cool project called Orthodox Volunteer Corps, the OVC. And they're just now getting started. They're just now taking applications. We're going to hear all about the OVC and what they're doing, but also we're going to hear about Michael. I want to get to know Michael and find out, where did he grow up and how did he end up in this line of work? And we're going to hear all of his fascinating stories as well. So hang on to your hats. It'll be a wonderful show. So without any further ado, Michael, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here.
Oh, we're really glad to have you, Michael. I appreciate you coming on the show. And so tell me, where does your story begin? Like, where were you born?
Yeah. I'll say just one thing by way of preface, and that is that these days, when I've been thinking about my life, I've been very aware that my parents will die. And I don't know exactly when they will die. It may be years still. But the ground shifted for them about a year ago, and their impending death is more palpable now than it was before, more palpable for them, for me, for our whole family. And that deeper realization of their death is influencing me in a lot of ways. And for this conversation, the connection is that it has really made me reflect on my parents' impact on my life. And it has made me even more grateful, right, for that impact and for the legacy they've given me. So that's sort of preface to say that, okay, so where was I born, where and when? So I was born in 1968 at the Temple University Hospital in Philadelphia. And
Wow.
those each are sort of important pieces for me, right? So 1968 was a watershed year for my family. My parents had finished up grad school that year. Actually, my mom finished her graduate work earlier, but my father finished grad school at Yale. And that in and of itself was really influential. Both my parents grew up in rural Canada on farms. They were living in communities that were very removed from sort of mainstream culture, right? They both grew up in the Anabaptist tradition. My mom, in fact, was Amish growing up. And so for them to even get an education was a really big step. They were the first in their family to go beyond high school, actually the first to go to high school and then to go beyond high school. And then when my dad got accepted into Yale, it just blew him away to imagine sort of going to this elite university in the United States, right? And and it's hard to exaggerate the distance that they traveled, not in miles, but in culture and in mindset. I mean, just because the place they grew up was literally called Punky Doodle's Corner, right? Like it's hard to imagine podunk place, right? It was called Punky Noodle's Corner, and they went from
That's
there to
awesome.
you
Oh
know
my
this
goodness.
elite university, right? So
Right. Oh,
so they
that's
finished up.
amazing. That's a
Yeah,
huge leap, though. So, have you ever been back? Have you ever seen Punky Doodle's Corner as an adult? Or, I
I
mean, as a little
have.
kid? Yeah. What's it
Yes, I have
like?
many times, many
What's
times.
it like?
Yeah, yeah.
Is it an Amish community, or is it just it's a community that has some Amish people and it has some other people? And what's it like?
Yeah, so it's a very rural area. In fact, there is a corner, right? There's just two. I think when we would go there when I was growing up, I'm pretty sure they were both dirt roads. That was at sort of that corner, and then
Wow.
my uncle actually took over the farm that my grandparents had worked on, and then that was the farm where my mom grew up. My father grew up a little bit further, and yeah, so just a really rural area, and it's a lovely spot in
Wow.
Ontario. Yeah,
Oh, that's
yeah,
neat. That's really neat. Okay, so your parents had grown up there, and then they go off to get an education, and your dad, a really big education, to go to Yale for graduate school.
exactly.
Were their families excited about it, or was it like a break with a tradition, or how did that work?
Yeah, I don't know. I think they were in general they were excited, and that um, the extent that they even knew kind of what Yale was, right? It was
Right,
pretty much off the charts, but just that he was, I think, going to school um, was, felt like an honor.
right,
Close contact, throughout all those years. They would always drive back, and at least a few times a year, right, to stay in touch with the family. And then we would always take trips back to Canada when I was a kid, and so that was, I got to know, my cousins and
wow.
loved just ice skating with them at Christmas time or doing some camping stuff in the summer. So those were
Oh,
really good
that's so
trips,
neat.
really good
So your
trips.
parents
Yeah.
met like as children, or how old were they when they
They
met?
met they actually met in 13th grade. So in Ontario, there is a 13th
Right.
grade, and they had gone to separate schools, but then there was a special school that they both went to for 13th grade, and that's where they met. And
Wow.
they had their first date as an ice skating on an ice skating rink,
Perfect.
and
Perfect.
then it did not take long before they were engaged, and then they got married. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Oh, that's
So that's
lovely.
when
And
they
then they
met.
went off on a great adventure together. How
They
beautiful.
did, indeed, they did.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So they were a few years into that adventure, and your dad had finished graduate school. What was he studying at Yale? What was he going to be?
Yeah, he was studying church history, and he also did some work. So he was in the history department, but then he also did work in the divinity school. And so it was a really influential time for him in a lot of ways, but because
Oh,
he was studying, the like the history of the faith, and he was trying to understand that ancient story, right, in the context of the 1960s, right, in the United States. And
right.
in fact, one of the really sort of pivotal moments for them, and this happened in 1968, before they moved from New Haven to Philadelphia, where I was born. They were renting an apartment from a couple who happened to be African American. And of course, it was in 68 when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. I was safely in my mama's belly, right, when he was shot in April. Um, but that happened, and my parents didn't have a TV at the time. They lived on the third floor of this house, and their landlords lived on the first floor. And so they didn't have a TV. And so they ended up watching the funeral of Dr. King on their landlord's TV with their landlords there, right? And
Mhm.
seeing Dr. King's funeral and the pain of that African American couple, right, was really searing for my folks. And they had been on this journey, right, from rural Canada, right, to a a small U.S. city, right, New Haven, Connecticut, and then ultimately to Philadelphia, and sort of just understanding like the story of American race relations, right, and then beginning to experience the civil rights movement, which is a profoundly Christian movement in many many ways, right?
Right.
They were just really deeply influenced by that. So that was another important piece of the legacy that they passed on to us, right? Um,
Right.
so
Absolutely.
they
Huh.
yeah, they and that's where I was born. And my father took a job um, starting the Philadelphia campus of a Christian college. Some may be familiar with it. It's called Messiah. It's now Messiah University.
Mhm.
Um, and so he took that job, and so for the first, I would say, 7 or 8 years of my life, I was sort of living on this little urban campus of Messiah College before we moved into another neighborhood in Philadelphia. So those are my earliest years in Philly.
Wow. Okay. Now, did you have siblings and were they born around the same time as you, or are you the oldest, I assume, because your dad was just finishing school?
So actually, I have an older brother. He's a
Ah,
year and a half older than me,
okay.
and then I have a younger sister, and she's 6.5 years younger than me. So my brother, we were thick as thieves for many years, and then my sister came along. She's actually adopted from Nicaragua, and I have very vivid memories of my parents, going to Nicaragua for a stretch of time when they got her and brought her into our family, and a very vivid memory of going to the airport when my mom finally came back, and there Sonia was. She was holding Sonia, and my mom was just really, I think she seemed like really red to me. I think she had been in the sun a lot, and so then, yeah, then we were then the three of us, and
Wow.
and that was our family then for the rest of the years. Yeah.
Oh, that's neat. So, I mean, that was fairly rare international adoption back in the 70s, right? Was that like an unusual thing, or did it feel quite normal and nobody reacted to it and it wasn't strange at all?
You know, I don't know how normal it was. I know that for my parents, it was a part of their journey of trying to live as faithfully as they could, right?
Mhm.
And part of what happened in their journey is that my parents and my father especially was doing more and more, reading of the scriptures and trying to understand, what does it mean when Christ again and again sort of spends time with folks who are poor, and how is there's so many passages about caring for the folks. We're trying to make sense of
Mhm.
that, right? And
Mhm.
one of the ways in which they wanted then to live that out was to say, we could give a home to a child, right, who is coming from a very impoverished,
Right.
community. In this case, very impoverished country. And so that was what was important for them, right, in thinking about this adoption. And they had some connections to folks in Nicaragua, some folks who are missionaries there, and so I don't know how common it was, but I do know that it was one example of my folks, and this is part of the legacy I believe that I really got from them. They were people of deep, deep integrity, and they really, really sought to live their faith, and that's just one way in which they did it.
That's lovely. I feel like I would love to meet your parents. They seem very sincere and sweet and religious. I assume they raised you in this way, you and your siblings. Would you describe your upbringing as a religious upbringing, and maybe not just religious, but really like I don't know the word for it. It's sort of active religion, right? Like
Yes,
trying to
yes,
live out the faith in
yes,
feeding the hungry and caring for the poor. Was that how you
yes.
were raised? What did that look like for you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can sort of give three snippets, right, that I think demonstrate that. So one was when I was pretty young, and it was probably about from when I was, 7 to about 10 or 11. We were a part of a we were part of like a small church community, right? That honestly, what we were trying to do was to live out how the early Christians in Acts were living, and so there was not a fully common purse, but a lot of our possessions we were sharing with one another. We lived close to one another. We would, like, all the people in the community. There would, like, one person would take care of the kids, maybe for a day, and then so other folks could have some time. Of course, we worshiped together, and so that was one experience that was I think, sort of an example of my folks really trying to live out their faith.
Mhm.
There's sort of a long story, but sadly that community fell apart for a lot of reasons, and so the next church community that my folks were part of a church, and that's the tradition that they both after my mom was Beachy Amish, and then it became that group became Mennonite. My father was bred in Christ, very similar to that, and he became Mennonite as well. So they were part of a Mennonite church, and the fascinating thing about this Mennonite church was it was in North Philadelphia. So anybody who knows Philly, right?
Mhm.
That's a predominantly African American community, and I think I believe it is gentrified in more recent years. But when I was growing up, um, it was probably over 95% African American, and Mennonites have largely been it's largely been sort of a white community, right? But
Right.
um, uh, there are a variety of different Mennonite churches. In any event, we were in this Mennonite church, and so you sort of associated with like this rural community,
Right.
women with head coverings, and
Right. I'm
the
thinking
the
German, kind
right,
of Little House
exactly,
on the
exactly,
Prairie
right, right, right.
families, right? Like, what
Right,
does that look like in
right.
North Philly? What?
Well, so what it looked like was we had a gospel, and it was an interracial, congregation, and it was a beautiful community, right? Of course, we had all kinds of struggles, right? But it was a beautiful community, and to bring together, kind of these this rural Ontarian, couple, right? Then, with this gospel choir, and I remember there was this white guy who was leading the gospel choir. It was an incredible pianist, and he would just he would move all around when he was playing the piano. And there would be folks, sometimes we'd be at African American churches, and they would look over at this guy. It's like, who is this guy down there? And they'd see this white guy, like, well, he knows how to do some gospel music, right? It was really,
Wow.
really just beautiful how it, brought together different traditions there.
Oh, that's neat.
So
That is really neat.
yeah,
Well, it's so interesting
yeah,
too, because when I think of the Mennonites, I think of, groups of people who are sort of moving around their own little ethnic group, living in different countries and different places, but very much being, closed off unto themselves other than mission work.
right,
It's a lot
right,
of a closed community. That's not what you experienced at all with the Mennonites, is it?
right,
There's,
right, right.
absolutely not closed off, but instead just open to the local culture and absorbing it and bringing it in. How fascinating. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
really neat. Okay, so you lived
yeah,
in Philly, like really in the heart of things and activity in an African American
yeah,
neighborhood. Was
yeah.
it like working class? Was it kind of more impoverished? Did you go to the public school? What was everything like for you growing up as a kid?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we lived in a sort of a lower middle class community. Like the guy across the street was a bus driver for the city, and somebody else was a teacher's aide, and guy down the street worked at a security company. So that was kind of the feel of the block.
This is such a
The It
cool,
was a
like,
really
classic Philly image that you're
yeah,
giving us.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah,
Sesame
yeah.
Street or
Well,
something, like, it's
that's right.
wonderful.
That's right. Well, and yeah, I mean, on the one side was row houses, which is very much Philly, and the other side was duplexes, and I don't want to I don't want to paint it as improperly. Like there was a kid down the street, right, who he was like visiting our house, we figured out actually he was kind of scoping out the house because he was going to try and rob us, right? So like it wasn't as if it was perfect. And there was also this time where my mom, she's a 5 foot person, right? And this one day had she was coming back from somewhere. She got out of the car and was just walking, half a block, right, to our house, but it was dark, and somebody came by and grabbed her purse. And the thing you're supposed to do if someone grabs your purse is let go, let them have your purse, especially right if you're a 5 foot tall woman and this guy grabs your purse. But my mom did not. She held onto her purse, and this guy starts dragging her down the street, but she
Oh my
wouldn't let
gosh.
go. and he just gave up and he ran
No
off.
way.
So
Oh, that's
yes,
awesome.
yes, yes. So in any event,
Oh,
it's not
God
like it was a
bless her.
perfect place. Yeah, yeah. But I really, really did enjoy this block. It was a lovely place to grow up, and there were so many kids in the block, and we had a great time. So yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
that is lovely. That's lovely. So what kind of a
yeah.
kid were you? What were you interested in doing? Who did you think you were going to be when you grew up?
Yeah, I loved running around. I loved playing baseball. I loved there were these stairs in front of our house, and I would just throw this tennis ball against the stairs and it would come back, and I'd imagine that I was some famous baseball player. Not that I was very good at any sports, but I loved doing it. And yeah, I think I was a pretty quiet kid. I was a friendly kid. I um I was reflecting actually just earlier today with my wife about this time that this kid teased me about these patches that I had on my pants, and I think the reason that he teased me is because tease anybody else. He got bullied a lot himself, and I think he knew I was the one kid who wouldn't have, done anything mean to him.
Right.
And well, you asked me earlier. So where did I go to school? I went to public school in
Mhm.
Philadelphia, and I really I enjoyed that time. I had good friends. It's interesting as I reflect back, just thinking too about how I was think I was just, pretty quiet, nice kid, right? I remember there was this girl I think in like seventh or eighth grade. And what's fascinating me about it in retrospect is that she almost like was I remember like one time she sort of like walked up to me and kind of like, gently like put her arm around me and but it was like she was sort of shepherding me because she had this sense that like I was this innocent kid and she was already caught up and she was like caught up in a lot of wild stuff already, even in eighth grade, right?
Mhm.
And as I reflect back on that, like I'm grateful for I'm grateful for the innocence that I had throughout that time and beyond, right? That and I think it was um, it was a combination of I think just a really pleasant and peaceful home and the stability of that. And also, I'm grateful to God for guiding me through those years in Philly and all the richness of it and all the things that could go awry. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it is remarkable, right, that you maintained a certain amount of innocence considering that's not a very innocent surroundings. It's not an innocent school. There's a lot of stuff around you, but it really is true that the environment that we create at home, it's so influential and it makes a very big difference. That is
Yeah.
that's lovely. I love thinking about that. We're going to take a short break because when we come back, I still need to hear, what did you end up doing as you grew up? Where'd you go off to school? How on earth did you find your way to the Orthodox Church? And of course, we're also going to be talking about the Orthodox Volunteer Corps. And so I want to let our audience know, I promise we will be talking about the OVC. And if you have any questions or comments, especially about that or about anything with Michael, you're welcome to give us a call at 1 855 AF Radio. That's 1 855 237 2346. And we will be right back.
Everyday Orthodox with Elissa Davis will be back in a moment. Give Elissa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855 AF Radio.
Hello, everyone. It's Father Nicholas Lowe with Live with the Lows, a show right here on Ancient Faith Radio. And I want to tell you about an amazing in-person retreat that I hope that you and your spouse can attend. Ancient Faith is hosting a Makeover Your Marriage retreat in which Roxanne and I will be hosting and speaking at this retreat. It's February 18th through the 20th, 2022 at the Antiochian Village Retreat Center in Ligonier, Pennsylvania. You can find out more information about this retreat, all the details about it, by going to store.ancientfaith.com/events. That's again, store.ancientfaith.com/events. I promise you that this retreat is going to be a retreat that can help your marriage and take it to a whole new level. So you don't want to miss out on this retreat. Once again, it's February 18th to the 20th at the Antiochian Village Retreat Center. And you can find out more by going to store.ancientfaith.com/events. God bless you all and stay strong in your walk of faith.
We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elissa Bielatich Davis. Do you have a question for Elissa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Elissa.
And welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. We're here tonight with Dr. Michael Cider Rose. He is heading up the Orthodox Volunteer Corps coming up soon. It's just opening up now. And of course, we'll be talking about that as well. But we've been talking about Michael's childhood in Philadelphia and his really lovely and interesting parents. And so, Michael, last we spoke, you're in 8th grade there, loving to play baseball and running around. So tell me, as you got into high school, and you're starting to sort of picture, what are you going to do after high school? You're going to go work, you're going to go to school. What was taking shape for you and sort of what did you envision yourself doing?
Yeah, I think that because in my family, education was so important. I really envisioned that, I was going to go into college, and I even thought, I'm going to go into grad school as well. And that's in fact what I did then. I went to high school actually outside the city then at a Mennonite high school, which is the tradition that I'd grown up in, and then I went to Messiah College outside of Harrisburg, PA, and I studied a whole bunch of things in college. I was just trying to find my way. But at the end, I was getting more and more interested in history, and I ended up then going to grad school in history, and I studied race relations. I was very interested in that, in the civil rights movement, in part because of some of the stories that I said earlier, right? I wanted to understand kind of how my parents got involved in the movement and what that meant. I was very interested in understanding Christianity in U.S. history, and U.S. History was the broad focus that I had. So studying that, I was studying urban history again because of growing up in the city. I wanted to make sense of this, and so I did that. Buried myself in the academy for 8 years, and when I popped my head out again and started checking out the world. That is, I'd gotten married the year before I finished grad school. And so I met this woman, and now we were married, and I wanted to go where she was going. And she wanted to go to Chicago,
Well, there
because
you
she wanted
go.
to go do graduate work, right? She wanted to do grad work. And so I ended up getting a job in Chicago at an off-campus program that brought college students to the city for a semester of internships and classes, and also just understanding the city. And it ended up being a great job for me because I had like one foot in the academy, one foot on the street. And I loved both of those things. I loved sort of walking with students and helping them to think about, their lives and trying to understand, make sense of their lives, especially make sense of them in the context of this big city. And most of the folks who came were from rural areas or suburban areas. And so like being in the city was culture shock for them, but it was also just an incredibly rich time to speak about our lives and to understand our faith and to make sense of just the diversity of human beings that were there. Someone at the beginning talked on the previous. It's in the intro to your show, right? It talks about that we are icons of Christ, and those when I was in Chicago, this is before I was Orthodox. Seeing those many icons of different colors and different traditions was incredibly beautiful. The actually the I'm getting off point from your question, but I'll just tell this very quick one story
That's all
because
right.
it
No,
really comes
that's
to mind
fine.
now.
Take your time. Tell a good story. I love a good story.
No, but I'm thinking about icons, right? And I worked in this office building. That's where we had for this sort of urban campus that I was working on. And there was a guy in the office building who worked the elevator. It was like one of these old school elevators, and you had to have somebody work it, pushed a lever. It was really cool. And his name was Mr. Emmett. And he, in some senses, like was a completely unimportant person in this place, right? He's the elevator guy, but he was the heart and the soul of that building. Every single person who came through talked to him every day, right? Because they had to get up to their floors.
Right.
He was a kind man. He was a gentleman. He had this incredibly effusive and positive spirit, right? And so all I knew about him for years, right, was he worked the elevator. But then I learned that his wife died, and and he invited me to come to her funeral. So I went, and he lived on the south side of Chicago. Anybody knows the city, south side of Chicago is African American neighborhood, right? He lived in this low income African American neighborhood, and I went to this church, and the church for his wife's funeral was packed. There were all kinds of people there, right? And the thing that was amazing was this guy who was in some sense, like in a worldly sense, not honored. In that moment in his church, he was so honored. And then he sang at her funeral, and he had this incredible voice. It was phenomenal. And I was just so struck, thinking about like an icon of Christ, how so often we miss, I think, icons. We're entertaining angels and don't know it. And that was a moment for me where I saw the just the beauty of that man. Sorry, I got
Oh,
off.
that is
I
beautiful.
got off
No, I
point.
love that. Actually, a good friend of mine, his father was a doorman at a hotel in Denver, and his
Mm,
father's like the
mm,
most fascinating, adorable, sort of effervescent Greek man, And it's just, you
mm.
wonder, right? Like how many of the people who walked past got to know him and saw this beautiful
Mm,
soul, and how many lives did he touch, and how many days did he brighten, but
mm.
also how many people missed it, and
Yeah,
with an elevator operator you can very easily ignore, but you can also
yeah.
stop and turn and find that he's got a twinkle in his eye, and something interesting to say. So, oh, that's beautiful. That's really quite lovely. I
Yeah,
like that very much. But you sort of
yeah.
zipped right past the fact that you met your wife. Who's your wife? How'd you meet her? This is a big development. Like, slow
It's a
down.
big
Let's
development.
quick go
It's a
back to
big
Philly
development.
and tell me, how did you meet her, and what's she like?
So I met my wife in Pittsburgh, actually. So it was after I had left
Ah,
Philly. I was in grad school. I
oh,
was in
that's right.
Pittsburgh.
Grad school at Pitt. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And she moved to town to be part of a program, sort of a post-college, um, like 1 year program. Not so different from OVC actually. And I met her at a church retreat. I was there with my church. She was there with this program, and I saw her, and we got to talking at that retreat. I was leaving for Chicago to actually do research for my dissertation a week later. I was like, this is terrible timing. Like, I just met this woman. I'm so jazzed about her, right? Um, but, so, okay, I got to do what I got to do. So I came her out right away. And I almost exactly a year to the day that we met, we got married. And we just knew, right? It was good stuff.
That's
So we got
beautiful.
married, and then we had a year in Pittsburgh, and then we moved to Chicago, and she started grad school there. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And what does she study? What
So
what was she
she
doing?
actually was in she was in the divinity school, and that's
Oh,
actually a really important part to how I became Orthodox. Because so she's in divinity school, and she's learning about the church fathers, right? And she's becoming more and more, just engaged and enthralled by this. Also, then she's an artist, and she started studying iconography. And she now is an iconographer. She's actually been doing it now for 30 years. But she
wow.
was at the time she was she's just sort of getting into this, right? And she she was drawn into orthodoxy through the church fathers and through iconography. And
Wow.
that was our story then, right? At first for me it felt so foreign, right?
Right.
And I'm grateful that she was like, no, listen, we need to go, we need to start visiting some churches, right?
Well, so at
And
that point, you had moved around in terms of denominations a little bit in your life, right? So were
right,
you
right.
were you feeling like I can't possibly stop doing what I'm doing now? Like, or was it just more like, wow, Orthodoxy is kind of weird. Maybe we check out that other church next door. Or like,
Yeah, yeah,
where were
yeah.
you in your head when she starts talking about this completely different thing?
Yeah, yeah. I think for me, the biggest piece was that it felt so foreign, and the foreignness I think was I grew up in a very low church tradition, and so the liturgy, and it's fascinating for me to hear myself say this now, right? But the liturgy felt very foreign to me, whereas now um, it is um, like it is the rhythm, of my life, right? It is, and it is. It took years for this to happen, but now it is just it is a part of like a way of being, right? And anyways, so
Well, but I would
that was sort of the
imagine
critical thing.
though, like as you're saying, right, you came from a low church tradition. So you were in,
Yeah.
I don't want to use the word casual, right? But it's almost more, I don't know, down to earth and less, I don't, however you want to describe it, right? But you
Hmm.
had such good examples of Christian love in your life, right? That it's a little
Yes.
scary to say, I'm in a tradition that clearly bears good fruit. I'm,
Yeah.
it's a big deal to try to embrace a different tradition. And as you say, there's a
Yeah.
way that you can look at it and maybe you're not saying that there's anything wrong with Orthodoxy, but it's just so foreign and it's so, so different. And
Yeah.
that's amazing. So as she's exploring it and she's looking more at the fathers and she's looking at iconography and these things, those are, not the day to day, that's not liturgy. Was it
Hmm.
easier
Hmm.
for her, do you think, to walk into liturgy and adopt it than it was for you?
I think it was. I think it was. Yeah. And um, and I don't, know fully why. It's actually a nice question. I want to ask her that. How exactly that sort of transition for her. How quickly it resonated. Right. Was there any for her sort of time period where she had to sort of um, yeah, just more kind of, at a visceral level, kind of get the
Yeah.
familiarity. Yeah, I think I think it was easier for her, and I think for me, the probably a combination of like there's um, a lot of similarities in terms of like small o orthodoxy, right? Like in the sense that there's just like fundamental beliefs, right?
Mhm.
That were absolutely um, a part of my upbringing. Now, the important differences, right? Like critical differences, right? You just sort of understanding of the Eucharist, right? And different components of the liturgy. Um, and others, but the
Right.
understanding iconography, for example. But I think that having some, many deeply shared common beliefs was really helpful in the process as well.
Excellent. Yeah, it is. It's interesting because as you sort of implied there earlier, that once you're involved in liturgy and you're sort of living that rhythm and you're a part of it, it seems like such a natural thing. But it is funny to think back on, oh gosh, the first time I walked in here, it was really strange to me. And, now I've
Mhm.
raised my kids in the church. And now one time they went to a Protestant church and they were like, Mom, this is so weird. It's so foreign. And it was so funny to me because, like, oh, I remember feeling the opposite, but it's true. It's just
Yes.
whatever we're exposed to. But of course, Orthodoxy is so different that from your average Christian experience in America. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah.
lovely. I
Yeah.
love that the two of you were able to convert together. I think that's such a
Yes.
neat thing
Yes.
and so impressive to me when couples are able to make that transition together. It's lovely. So, okay, so
Yeah.
then you become Orthodox and you're in Chicago. Did you guys stay in Chicago? What did you end up doing when she finished school?
Yeah, so we actually moved back to Pittsburgh, and we it was a big conversation for us because um, my my wife is she's so thoughtful, and she has the challenge she faces is she has too many talents, right? So she could go in so many different directions, right? She was in a PhD program at the University of Chicago in the Divinity School, and she was killing it there, right? She was doing a great job, and she's a really talented artist, and so she got like this. this grant to go across the country and study with a bunch of different iconographers, right? So she was getting
Oh,
deep into
cool.
iconography at the same time, right? Um,
Right.
and and then what happened is we had our first two children, and all of a sudden, in this little apartment in Chicago, there were more people, and these little people, like they had their own lives, right? And they would say things, and they started walking around, right? It was unbelievable. It was just phenomenal. So we we now had this abundance, right, in our lives, and we had to figure out what we were going to do because Randy, my wife's name is Randy, Randy Maria. She felt like she had a few things in front of her. She could go the academic route, right? She could become an iconographer, and she knew she was absolutely going to continue to be a mom, right? And she
Right.
felt like she had to choose two of those three. She felt like she couldn't do all three, right? And she, after many, 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 many hours of conversation, she decided, you know what? I want to do iconography and parenting, right? Those are the two I'm really going to go for. So she pulled out of the PhD program, much to the dismay of her advisor. And we moved then back to Pittsburgh because we had a community here. And it was actually in Pittsburgh where we became Orthodox. And so, sorry, I forgot what the initial question was,
Well,
but
that's
that's
interesting though. So she was already sort of dedicated to iconography and she wasn't even chrismated yet.
that's right. That's exactly right.
Wow.
And that was
Wow.
even also part of it for her. She had been so drawn in by Orthodox. And she was like, wait a minute, I can't do this from the outside. I can't, you know? And, uh, and so, I mean, she actually knew an Episcopal iconographer, but just felt like it was not, yeah, it just couldn't do it.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
And yeah, yeah.
Well, that's really neat. She really did come in for through iconography in some
Yes,
profound way.
yes,
Oh, that's really,
yeah.
really neat. So I imagine as you continued through your career, were you continuing to focus on programs, I guess, both that bridge these questions of like urban life and urban needs, and also this encountering this moment, right, of young people in college or just after college as they're discovering who they are and what their vocation is and how they'll live out their lives. Has your career always kind of been based on that nexus there?
That's exactly it. That's what I've done the whole time. I did it in Chicago. When I moved back to Pittsburgh, I started a program called Pittsburgh Semester. The one I did in Chicago was called Chicago Semester. I wasn't very creative in my titling the new one.
Well, you know what? It
Um,
communicates the purpose. I think it's fantastic.
so I did this program, Chicago semester. That program, for a variety of reasons, didn't last, and then I took a job at this place called the Coro Center for Civic Leadership. It was a nonprofit, but it was the same sort of work. Now that one was in a secular context. That last one, and I did that for 13 years. But exactly as you described it, like the working with young adults, right, at this pivotal moment in their lives, I've just found to be an incredibly rich experience, and I'm so grateful for the many conversations and the way in which, in time after time in those conversations when I would walk with young adults, even when I was in the secular context, we would get to a point, right, where people would begin to speak about deep meaning in their lives and trying to figure out, like, what do I do, right? And how do I do that? And how do I do that, well and with integrity, with deep, with having like a deep moral compass. Those questions are profoundly religious questions, and so I just discovered that I would get to this point where I talked to folks like, listen, I can't respond to that question unless I tell you, I respond to it as a Christian, right? And
Yeah.
and as an Orthodox Christian, right? And so I would do that, I'd ask them, you okay with us going here? I'm not sure how to, take the conversation after this.
Right.
And usually they were, but anyways, that's exactly it. That's the work that I have done. And I felt like it's been an incredible privilege to do that work.
Absolutely. Well, and it's true though. It's so hard to have that conversation with because you're talking about your essential identity as a human being, right?
Yes.
And that
Yes.
is, our identity is in terms of Christ. It's, well, we have a
Yes.
creator and he made us for a reason. And how are we going to live out
Yes.
that meaning? How are we going to live out that purpose? And so it is a
Yes.
natural fit. It's hard to keep it secular, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
oh, well, that's lovely. I mean, it's interesting because, on the one hand, we're talking about young people trying to find their calling, but that's your calling, right? That's your vocation has
Mm,
been to help
mm,
people at that pivotal time, which is so beautiful because it's not that all of these deep questions about identity, it's not that we don't think about them later, but it's that we pick a path and we sort of believe
mhm,
in it and we follow that path.
mhm,
And so we have our
mhm,
answer in a
mhm,
sense, But
mhm,
oh,
mhm.
that's neat. Okay, so tell me now about this new project that you're doing and how this came about. And of course, I can see how it absolutely connects to this lifelong career that you have of working with young emerging adults as they find their vocation. Tell us about the Orthodox Volunteer Corps and what this is.
Yeah, yeah. So it started about 2.5 years ago when the Assembly of Bishops gathered a meeting of Orthodox Christians from across the country to talk about the question of homelessness. And at that gathering, a bunch of different people began to say, if we want to address homelessness or any other, social issue, we've got to have people, we got to have leaders who both understand the details of whatever the issue is, who understand communities and engaging with communities at a grassroots level, and who are deeply rooted in their faith, right?
Hmm.
And so um,
Well,
people at this gathering were also saying then, using the very same language, saying, you know what we need? We need an Orthodox Volunteer Corps. And it was remarkable.
right.
Like, again, folks who hadn't talked to each other at all, right? Using the same language. And so we started to meet. The Assembly of Bishops commissioned a working group, and we met for over 2 years,
Well,
planning,
out of
planning, planning,
curiosity,
planning.
who is
Yeah,
this group meeting together? Like when you say the Assembly of Bishops called together a bunch of Orthodox Christians, who did they
yeah.
call together and how did they find them and what sort of people? You know what I mean? Like, is it each jurisdiction the bishops kind of reached out to people that they knew were somehow active in serving homeless communities, or how is it? How do they pick people and who do they choose? And you know what I mean? Like, who's at these
Yeah, yeah,
meetings?
yeah. Yeah, so the many of the people who were there were part of Orthodox organizations, right, that are
Okay.
doing service work in some fashion, right, especially to communities who are vulnerable, right? And so Focus North America was there, right?
Hmm.
OCMC was there, Project Mexico, Orthodox Christian Fellowship, Crossroad, Neighborhood Resilience Project, St. Basil Academy, right? And all of those organizations that I mentioned, they all sent representatives to this working group then, right?
Okay.
And it was incredible, just collection of people. It was a beautiful example, I think, of the Orthodox Church, having people from different jurisdictions and different organizations collaborating, coming together. It was really, really lovely. And yeah, so that's who it was. That's who it
It's
was.
wonderful. I love the Assembly of Bishops because, I mean, we often joke, like, if you don't like organized religion, come on over to Orthodoxy because we're so disorganized. And we're reinventing the wheel nonstop, right? We have 15 different departments of education. Fantastic. But, but I mean, I do love the Assembly because it is this opportunity to bring together everyone and not to say, well, you're under this bishop and we're under that bishop. And so, if we can all come together and it doesn't matter, different jurisdictions, different calendars, different whatever, everybody comes together and gets to work on these important questions that we have to solve together. So
Yeah.
everyone's sort of, it's interesting, right? This idea that the words Orthodox Volunteer Corps just kind of keep surfacing and bubbling to the top. And what exactly, as it forms and takes shape, what is an Orthodox Volunteer Corps? What does that look like?
Yes, yes. So it is 10 months of investment development of Orthodox young adults through service, right, and formation, and and so that same idea, right, if we need a next generation, right, of folks who can really carry on the important work, of the church in the church and outside of it. So what happens is folks who participate in the program will sign up, will come apply, and if they're accepted, come for 10 months, and during those 10 months, right? It'll be full time, and we're starting in Pittsburgh. So people would who participate would move to Pittsburgh, and they would spend 4 days a week working at a nonprofit. So they get this intense experience in a nonprofit on the ground doing direct service work. And we carefully are vetting those nonprofits so there's good alignment, right, with an Orthodox ethos. And some of those organizations will be Orthodox organizations themselves. For example, the Neighborhood Resilience Project is an example of that. And so they have this, really good experience. They get this hands-on experience, and it will be both important, I think, in terms of their own professional development, because it really will give them an important edge, right? There's certain things they can learn in that context that I think can be applicable to lots of different fields, whatever they go into, right? But they will also be getting this hands-on visceral experience with communities that are vulnerable in particular ways. And that experience is so critical, right? It is a way, I believe, of helping us to be in a kind of raw moment in our lives. It softens us in a way where we can be ready, I think, to grow in our faith in really new ways. It can soften us away in terms of finding out a way to develop deep community with folks who are very different from us, right? And from whom, we can share, what we know, and we can learn deeply from them, right? This sort of, giving and receiving of insight and experience, I think, can really happen if you have this chance to really dig in for 10 months, into a community, right? So that's one piece. They'll do these placements at a nonprofit. One day a week, they'll be in seminar with us. Has two main components. One is to ground them in orthodoxy, right? Understand, what does orthodoxy have to say, about service, right? What is in our tradition, right? In terms of, attending to the poor, right? Like we need to understand, where hospitals began with Orthodox, where orphanages began with Orthodox, right? So this is an important part of the curriculum. The other piece is leadership development, right? And that's what I've done the past 13 years when I was working at this nonprofit, really helping folks to understand, how do you engage a community in a constructive way? How do you understand the assets of that community? How can you really carefully think about the particular ways that you can contribute, right? And then how can you, figure out how you engage groups of people to constructively move forward towards goals, right? So we'll have that component, right? So there's the placements, there is the formation through the seminars, and then the last two pieces are, number one, community. They will live in a house with the other 6 to 7 core members, right? So there'll be a total of 6 to 8 core members. They'll live together, right? And that we know from our experience, the power of peer learning, the power of sort of working through the day-to-day, sort of trials and pleasures of life, right? Learning that takes place there, right? Again, it's another example of deep community, which is really important, right? For this program. And then finally, the last pillar of the work is undergirding it all, and that is the local parish, right? So we need to engage the participants in the life of the local parish, right? That this is an Orthodox program, a profoundly Orthodox program. So, experiencing the rhythm of the liturgy, right? And then connecting that, right, to the work that they are doing, the service work, to the seminar, like it's just going to be critical, right? So that's the program in a nutshell.
Oh, I love this. Well, and the interesting thing to me is that when you think Orthodox Volunteer Corps, I think a lot of people might immediately just think, oh, you're just getting together volunteers to come and help and feed somebody and to, man a soup kitchen or something, which is beautiful work. But you're doing something much more profound, which is thinking about, how do we invest in young people and turn them into like Orthodox activists who are just going to go out there and in their own ways, each in a different way perhaps, try to make the world a better place. And I think that's beautiful. And I wonder if there's anyone in our audience, as you're talking about this seminar on orthodoxy and service, thinking that they might want to take such a seminar, because I think, being in America today, a lot of times you'll see, there's a hurricane and there's a whole church out there and everybody's wearing matching t-shirts and they're serving things and stuff. You don't see the Orthodox doing stuff like that as much. And I do think that Orthodox people are intensely charitable and that they do a lot of good, but I don't know if it's always visible. And the problem, and in a way that's good, right? Because we don't want to be constantly advertising our good deeds. But the problem with that is, do our kids know that Orthodoxy really is about service and that
Yeah.
that we know, because there's that worry, right? That, well, we're going to
Yeah.
teach them the gospel, and they're going to read it, and they're going to see Jesus saying, "Okay, go out and feed the hungry," and they're going to look around and they're going to be like, "Well, our church is just having a Greek festival this week. Like, what do we have to do with that?" And it's important for them to know that, right? That like Saint Basil the Great, when you're making your
Yeah.
vasilopita, that's in
Yeah.
honor of baking money in the bread and bringing it out and
Yeah.
giving it to the people. And, maybe
Yeah.
next year we should do a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
so talk to
Yeah.
me a little bit about that tradition of charitable work and what that means and what it means to go out and encounter icons of Christ on the street. From an Orthodox, what will you guys be teaching in the seminar, essentially?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's part of it. Some of the things that that we already mentioned, right? Like we're going to have them read, Saint Basil the Great on social justice, right? Like
Right.
that is powerful, powerful stuff, right? We'll have them read, Saint Maria of Paris, right? And
Yes.
and just like I'm thinking about the um, just the way in which she speaks about in her writing, Saint Maria of Paris, the suffering, right, of Christ and the suffering of the Theotokos, and that in that there is there's also a communion, right? And of course, we experience this, profoundly in the Eucharist. And so then to think about offering our lives, right, and all of creation, as Schmemann talks, back to God, right? That this is the tradition, right? That we need to speak of, and we need to understand, right? These the material things of this world, right? And see bread, right? As yes, it is life, and people need bread to eat, right? This is part of service. This is the bread of life, right? And so we experience bread then transfigured, right? In the Eucharist. So this is part of the work of Orthodox Volunteer Corps to carry on and to teach that tradition to the folks who come in the program.
And not just to them, right? But they're going to go out and they're going to come back to the other parishes and they're going to do work in other places and they're going to help to sow those seeds and to spread that
Absolutely.
word. And I think it's wonderful. I'm really excited about the Orthodox Volunteer Corps. If anyone's interested in signing up, how do they find you guys?
Yeah, go to our website, orthodoxvolunteercorps.org, and that's CORPS, right? orthodoxvolunteercorps.org. And our application is on there. You can just click on the link to apply. Of course, there's lots of information. We are accepting applications right now. The deadline is February the 15th. So this is the
Ooh.
time. I would say if someone is hearing this who is 21 to 29, that's our age range, 21 to 29, we would welcome you to check out the website, come to one of our info sessions. And if you're not in that age range, but you know someone, right? Someone who's maybe at a transitional point in their life, maybe finish up college, maybe they're at a job, but they're not, they don't want to stay there. It's not the right fit for them. Someone who loves the church, right? Who has a desire for service, but really could nominate them, right? We got a nomination link on our website,
Ah.
or share with us. We'd love to get connected to them.
Oh, that's beautiful. And what was that website one more time? Is it
Yeah,
OVC?
no, it's orthodoxvolunteercorps.org. Spell out all the words.
Perfect. You got it.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
And I'll put that on our page, of course. And Michael, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has been an absolute pleasure, and I'm so excited about your work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to our audience for joining us. Thanks for coming back tonight, and join us again next Sunday night. We'll meet another wonderful everyday Orthodox Christian. We'll see you then. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're still going to be live on Ancient Faith for a little while longer because we have Father Evan Armitage for you. Father Evan, Happy New Year. How are you?
Good. I always kind of feel like I